Good evening. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to the stream that just kept getting pushed from Friday to Monday and now here on Tuesday. It's just been one heck of a week, also in true crime, and also with some things going on with me personally. I haven't been able to actually keep the schedule as I should. But we're here now. And there's been a lot going on in the case of the federal government in USA out of New York against Sean Combs, aka P. Diddy or Puffy or Diddler, whatever you want to call him. Yeah, it's been crazy. Now, we've been doing weekly updates. And so, what I would like to do is first bring us up to date from where we left off. And we had the last witness on the stand the last time that we spoke. And that was Agent Cerciello, special agent from Homeland Security. And what he was doing for the prosecution was documenting all of the messaging uh, from Jane and Sean Combs and all of that information, documenting where it came from, going over all the text messages and the conversations, and actually validating them, like their source and all of that. The same that the other Homeland Security agent or Delicia Penlin did in regards to the Cassie Ventura documentation of all of the conversations back and forth, audio and email and text messaging and such, for the events that they testified to. So he actually put into evidence with the prosecution all of that supporting documentation, um, for the events that happened with Jane. And that's a pseudonym for an ex girlfriend of Sean Combs. Actually, I think it was perhaps his current girlfriend, because I believe that they just have lost contact since he was arrested. All right. Or one of his girlfriends, I should say. Welcome, welcome, everyone coming in. So, once they got all of that documented, and then they were going to head forward to closing arguments. And well, I was waiting on closing arguments, and I really wish that we had been able to get the audio, at least out of the courtroom for that to hear it. But we did have to go by documentation of what others said, and I did read it line for line from some of the reporters that you all may see documenting on X and documenting on news channels in articles, what actually is said back and forth, and especially in the closing arguments, what the prosecution had to say. So for the prosecution, for the U.S. government, uh, the assistant prosecutor, state's attorney, Christy Slavik, was first up, and she took 4 hours, almost the whole day, to document the case that they presented. And what was interesting about it is she went like testimony by testimony and charge by charge, element by element, and where the actual evidence was for that, and what the actual sorry about that. No, can I hold on 1 second? I'll be right back. I'm sorry. My apologies. I do have a family member with an issue, so I did have to take that. Yes, it was the phone, Jean. You definitely, yep, you heard a phone ring. It's exactly what it was. My cell phone, actually, my cell phone actually rings just like an old-fashioned telephone. And that reminds me what I have to do. And I'm glad you can't read lips. You don't want to know what I had to say. No, you don't. You don't. Well, thank you all for understanding. I'm sorry about that. I was hoping the call came through before I went live. But I want to get this update done for sure. So, in the closing arguments from the prosecution of the state, as Christy, Slavik, we actually point by point on where they showed the evidence for each charge and what testimony it was and how it proved it. It was really good because it did help. I thought it would be very helpful for the jury to go step by step through this and to actually see where, you know, where the evidence is for each charge so they would be able to go back later and ask for documentation if they needed it or a review or go back to their notes. It was just helpful because a lot of times you're just left with a bunch of legal jargon in the jury instructions and it's a little difficult. But if the prosecutors actually take the time to walk you through the case, it did take a while, and you do have the risk of losing the jury when you go 4 hours into anything. But I thought that they did a really good job. I should mention that after the prosecution's last witness, it was turned over to the defense before this closing argument. And the defense really only presented 20 minutes worth of evidence. And it was with text messages. And basically, what they did, but let me say this. I think you all know me well enough to know that I really do believe in the justice system and that Sean Combs should get the best opportunity to defend himself and get a fair trial. But sometimes I find things that defense does, or even a prosecution does, a lawyer in general, that could be offensive. And I'm gonna just let the chips fall where they may. But let me just say that Marc Agnifilo, who is the head attorney for P. Diddy, Sean Combs' defense team, is an excellent attorney. He has a very expensive and very qualified team. He's got Brian Steele, he's got Westerhouse, like he's got Teny Gregors. I mean, he's got so many there. Excellent, excellent lawyer talent. And what they chose to do for defense, in my humble opinion, I'm not a lawyer. To me, it seemed like a simple, like class 101 in victim shaming, in victim blaming. Yeah. Because they got up there and they presented emails or messages to where the women were speaking kindly to Sean Combs, saying how much they loved him, saying how much they liked being with him, how they enjoyed sexual interactions with him, and etc. Forgetting all of the negatives, but just honing in on the positives, painting the women as giving a skewed story, as if maybe this is some kind of conspiracy against him or something, that they're scorned lovers or they just changed their mind or whatever, as if none of the other stuff has happened. Well, that was 20 minutes of that. And then it went over to the prosecution and they did their closing argument. And then Marc Agnifilo got up to do his closing argument. And basically, it's that his closing argument to the jury was to explain that this was personal relationships and they're complicated. And that Sean Combs is a complicated man. Does he have anger issues? Perhaps. But is he guilty of all of this? No. His relationships with these women, they were private relationships with all adults consenting, and that it was complicated. Basically asking the jury to ignore the pictures of bruises all over Cassie Ventura, or an actual video caught live of him actually assaulting her. That they should ignore all of the text messages where the women said they didn't want to do this anymore, where he blackmailed them or threatened them with taking their finances away. But, we should ignore all of that because he's just a complicated man. But I agree, he's complicated. But I don't know if he's actually guilty to the extent that they are painting this to be. But you can't ignore. You can't ignore what the women are saying. Well, that is exactly what the defense wants the jury to do. Well, after they got up there and did all of that, then Marie Comey, the actual head prosecutor for this case, got to do rebuttal. And well, she did something that really made me very pleased because she reminded the jury about the definition of legal consent. And that, yes, part of what Marc Agnifilo, attorney for Sean Combs, said is true. They were in a great relationship before, a loving relationship before. And the women did have love for Sean Combs. But two things can be true at the same time. They could have had this long-term loving relationship and still denied consent when things went down. They could have liked being in a freak off on day 1, and on day 12 decided it wasn't for them anymore. And that's where the problem started. Because when they said no, or when they decided they didn't want to do it anymore, that's when violence happened for Cassie Ventura. And that is when threats of financial repercussions happened to Jane, or withdrawal or manipulation. She explained it a little different. She had a more emotional relationship with Sean Combs, and he would deny her kindness or talking to her or anything. And she was like just over her head in love with him. And she says she would do anything for him. And so this really was control and manipulation and coercion. And she would change her mind and then go back. With Cassie, she would be blackmailed. Her parents had to pay money to keep him from exposing freak-off videos. They proved that in the trial with the documentation of the books of Bad Boy Enterprises where the money came in and out again. Well, I was happy that they actually went through the legal definition of when consent can be. You can consent on one day and not have consent on the next. And it's the withdrawal of consent that is important here. Because it's very easy to interpret that perhaps that they just weren't really that upset about it. But still, you can't stand there and say they're all consenting adults. Yes, they were at one time, but it doesn't sound like they were all the time. And it's those times where they weren't that the charges represent. And this is why I worry about the jury, Yep. Mm. So for everyone coming into the other platforms, I'm currently streaming on multiple platforms right now, YouTube, Kick, and Twitch. And so I just want to welcome anyone who's in any of those chats. If I don't mention your name, it's just that we have so many going on, but welcome, and feel free to ask questions in regards to the case against Sean Combs, P. Diddy, in the chat, and I will try to answer them the best that I can as we're going forward. Yeah. Right, Mrs. Cassandra, they might be consenting adults, but not all consenting adults have big organized baby oil kits at their disposal, or need to take drugs to participate or any of that. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much more. And so when the defense and Sean Combs say he's a complicated man, I would say, yes, he is. And that's what led to a very complicated case. It's not that simple. I think the prosecution did a good job laying it out. And so after closing arguments, they did, do the rebuttal on Friday. They actually left for the weekend, and the jury came back on Monday to receive their jury instructions from the judge. And the judge, laid it all out for them. They started the deliberations. And, well, They started with several questions. I mean, right out of the box. I think it was less than an hour and a half in. They came up and said that a certain juror number 25, I believe it was, had already made up their mind it wasn't able to follow the instructions of the judge for deliberation. And what should they do? And that was bizarre to me, you know, very bizarre to me. Like I've never actually witnessed anything like that before. I mean, has anyone else actually said anything? You know, but they were expressing concerns about that one juror, believing they were unable to follow the judge's instructions. They weren't going to discuss anything or whatever. That seems sus. So they sent back a very benign response. And just advising them to follow, certain rules of the judge, and that they are obligated by taking on this jury duty to participate in that, and in that part of it. You actually have to contribute here. You can't dodge. And if they did continue to act that way, I mean, the judge could have went further if they got more feedback from the jury at the time. If they still continued not to actually deliberate or not actually to discuss everything openly, and refusing to almost immediately, that juror could be removed for not actually honoring their obligation to the jury. But it didn't get that far because they didn't mention it again. So it, the very right after that, a few hours later, well, let me just say that when the jury did express the concern about the fellow juror member, the judge sent a note just reminding them to do their duty, to deliberate, and their obligation to follow the instructions on the law, in that they really needed to. Okay. The next question that came up was what actually, if I remember correctly, let me just get the wording properly. It was about drug distribution. If the jury asked how they should access the drug distribution allegations against Combs. In other words, if someone asked you for drugs and then you gave them to them, is that distribution? That's how the question was worded. This is actually a very crucial element in the racketeering charge, okay, because Sean Combs did pay multiple personal assistants in people who worked through Bad Boy Entertainment, and he actually had them do errands for purchasing drugs. They would buy them and he would reimburse them the money. He would actually tell them what he wanted. They would go and get it. Sometimes through in prearranged situations, and there was money going back and forth, and some of it came in and out of Bad Boy Entertainment. That's a problem. That is his business enterprise. That means it's not just personal anymore. Kind of really leads up to the RICO and the racketeering. It's one of the elements. So it's very curious on, like, just if somebody gives you drugs, is that distribution? And under the law, yes, it is. Yes, it is. So when the judge sent back a response on that, now the answer to that went back and forth between the prosecution and the defense. Remember, the judge reads the question to them and they get to weigh in on what the answers to be. The judge is the final decision, but they all get to, put their part in it and give the judge something to think about. And so this was going back and forth between, should they just do the statute? Should they educate them on the law? Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe we should talk about quantity in law. And, it just went back and forth. But ultimately, the judge and the attorneys, they went on back and forth for a while. And basically, like, what does that define? Like, if somebody asked for it, like, that was the main concern. What do you mean? Like, particularly if the drugs were given to somebody who literally asked for them. And I think they may have been referring to several times when Cassie Ventura said, I had to do all of these drugs just to get through it. And she would say, can I, say to Sean Combs, like, is this going to be available? Is that going to be available? Can I take this? And often expressing that she needed to be really, really high to do the freak-offs. That was part of the testimony over and over again. I'm wondering if that's where they were focusing. But not being in the room, it's hard to tell. But ultimately, the judge adopted the prosecution's proposed response, which pointed to the definition in the charge document that they were given in the jury instructions to what distribution actually was. In other words, just referring simply to the wall. And that stated that distributing means simply to deliver, to pass over, or to hand over something to another person. And that would be the definition of it. So if somebody asked for something and somebody gave it to them, that's distribution. Period. Okay. So now we go back, and we left yesterday for the day. Not too much, more going on, back and forth with questions, and we waited. But today, well, that brings us to today into very, very interesting part of the case. Because all of a sudden we get this note from the jury that they have reached a verdict on charges 2 through 5. Now, 2 through 5, that's not racketeering in RICO. That's charge 1. Okay. Charge 2 through 5 involve the sex trafficking charges of Cassie Ventura and Jane, and also the traveling across state lines to promote prostitution, the Mann Act. So there is a charge for each of them for both Cassie and Jane. So like 2 and 3 for Cassie under sex trafficking in the Mann Act, and then 4 and 5 for Jane. Okay, one charge for each. So apparently the jury said verdict. Now, verdict does not mean guilty or not guilty. It just means they've decided. So we don't know what they've decided. What they decided that there was some unanimous rather decision of verdict for charges 2 through 5 involving the sex trafficking and prostitution of Cassie Ventura and Jane, but not on the RICO. They said that they're deadlocked, and they wanted to know what to do. And so in this case, like often we've seen an Allen charge, be distributed. But in this case, the judge took the softer end, and he just told them to continue to deliberate, that they should do their best to try to discuss it. And that to let us know, when they wanted to leave for the day. And it wasn't very short after that they decided, they must have had headaches from discussing it already, and they decided to leave for the day. And the judge brought them back in and said, come back in tomorrow morning and we'll start deliberations again on that charge. And then this caused such a hell of a hullabaloo all over the place on the socials and the news and everything. Oh, verdict reached in, the P. Diddy case. Like, no, not necessarily. Like, they have to sign this slip and turn it in before we have an actual verdict. So let's just get that out of the way right there. They can say the word verdict all they want and say they decided, but then they go through the motions and turn it into the judge. It ain't there yet. So we're not there yet. They're going to deliberate some more tomorrow, and anything can change. For all we know, they'll sleep on it and change their minds about 2 through 5. I mean, that's very unlikely, but it's possible. So, like I'm just saying, nothing's in the bag yet. Okay, nothing is finalized yet. And then one of the questions I know I'm going to get is, well, what happens now? What if they can't decide on charge 1? What if they're still deadlocked and they refuse to go one way or the other? Well, it is possible that they could submit the verdict for charges 2 through 5, and he will be convicted or not on those charges, guilty or not guilty. And then there would be a mistrial for charge 1. leaving it open for the prosecution to charge again, because there wouldn't be any double jeopardy, because he wouldn't be charged for everything, because of course the ones that are rendered verdict cannot be recharged regardless of what the verdict. You just can't do that. That would be double jeopardy. But if they don't come to a satisfactory unanimous decision on the RICO and racketeering, then that would go forward to retrial. And then it would be up to the prosecution whether they would pursue it again. The option would be open. Now, another thing is that during the day tomorrow, the judge could issue an Allen charge. And an Allen charge asks them to seriously continue deliberations until they come to a decision. Well, many states frown upon them. Some states have actually overturned an Allen charge, saying it's very coercive. It's kind of strong-handing the jury, putting pressure on them. And it's a bit of coercion, to make them settle or change their mind about something. Because at the same time it says, come on, we want you all to agree. It also says, well, make sure you stand on your convictions of what you actually believe. Don't let our pressure, affect that while we're pressuring you into making a decision. Yeah, it's a bit of a problematic situation. Well, this judge chose not to issue one yesterday. Actually earlier today, not yesterday. And I kind of commend him on that, because there's no need to put pressure on them. They've only been deliberating for 2 days. And so, they could do a little bit more, Let's see. What happens when the jurors all have a positive decision, but not all decided the same way? Then mistrial on that charge. But, so they are able to do a verdict on the charges separately. So they, mistrial, hung jury. Exactly, Liam. It's not a deadlock. Exactly. And that's why the judge sent him back, because of the wording. It's not necessarily a deadlock if they're just not sure. And they did ask for additional information. You're correct, Liam. So it's not necessarily a deadlock. They haven't decided, oh, he's guilty or not guilty. They just don't know how to look at this RICO very well. And they did ask for additional testimony. And it's quite curious as to the testimony that they did ask for, because it was involving Cassie Ventura, the event at the hotel from 2016, and also the event that happened with the prostitute Daniel, his testimony in regards to an event that happened in, Cassie was talking about being on a vacation, a second event with Sean Combs, in that he accused her of stealing drugs and threw her off the yacht and yada yada. And then, when he got angry and everything, and he was going to forgive her, the cost was she had to do a freak off. And then this Daniel person was actually testifying to that was like that whole thing, to another time where Cassie Ventura was completely slumped over and totally out of it drug wise, and actually still had to participate in this situation with the freak off. And so that was the testimonies they asked for to look at when they were talking about, like, they needed more information on for the RICO charge. So, it's whether or not they believe that there was no consent there, or that there was retaliatory efforts by Sean Combs anytime somebody said no about a freak off. To me, that speaks volumes, But if they have people that don't want to see it, well, that's different. Well, it could go either way. I mean, right now, I'm not so sure that it's going to be guilty on the charges that relate to Cassie and Jane for sex trafficking in for traveling across state lines for prostitution. Because here's my thinking. If they were a solid guilty on those, wouldn't that support the RICO charge, and there would be a little less doubt there or confidence there, since you only need 2 elements of RICO? of all of the things that they showed, the blackmail, the coercion, the violence, the threats, um, the using of company funds. Uh, Seriously, like if those two are guilty, I don't see why there would be such an issue for Rico. And yet other people are totally the opposite. They're like, no, those are guilty, and they just want to be sure because Rico is just so hard to understand. Like they want to see that it actually was a network of people working to help him to do this, and that he was in charge. And actually, the network can be very small, but when you have all of your personal assistants working to help you get the freak off room set up, buy the drugs, make all of the arrangements, travel arrangements, even your second in command at Bad Boy Entertainment, you know, KK, they keep mentioning, Christina Cornell, who's the who's not charged, but knows everything that Sean's doing and participated in many of the conversations in text messages between him and Cassie, between him and Jane, in making arrangements and filing, for planning on trips and this and that, and even when they had disagreements. KK right there, understanding what's going on, trying to get Sean to calm down and do this or that, and trying to talk to Cassie about, it'll be okay, whatever. Like plenty of messages like this where she's right in the middle of it, and she's works for the company. She's not a personal assistant of Sean Combs. Okay, so I don't see where the problem is with Rico, but then again, I'm not on the jury. They may be looking at it totally different than I am. But it did make me concerned. And I did have my notion that perhaps he'd be walking on all of this. And wow, would that be a statement? Well, based on how the last couple of weeks have gone, I'm just ready for anything. I don't know about you guys, but I'm thinking it could go either way. Either way. But let me just check for this. Like, hi, Grace. Though the jury, okay, those charges are the kind of thing which requires the jury to think the actions were taken with malice afterthought. Hmm. Rather than being actions which can be interpreted as malicious or manipulative. This is true, but that's not part, like that's not needed for the charge. So, but I do understand what you mean. Like they have to approach it in a certain way to get there. And I can see that, Liam. I can definitely see it. You know, if they don't find him guilty on 2 through 5, what's that mean for 1? Well, they haven't. From what they're saying currently, they are not unanimous about 1, so it would be a hung jury, which means charge 1 for Rico would get a mistrial and would be up for availability of recharging, like redoing the whole thing with PDD, a whole nother trial, just like in Karen Reed. However, if they don't find him guilty, he's just going to be exonerated. He gets an acquittal for the other charges, 2 through 5, and they will not be recharged because you can't do double jeopardy. There's a verdict. As long as there's a verdict, you can't come up on the same charges. So if the judge that decides it is a hung jury, how do they judge the lady jury? If the judge that decides it is, oh, very funny, Gary. This is a lovely play on words. And I actually said that live, and I hate you now, but I don't. It's actually funny. But stop it. Like my brain is just not working that way, you know. Grace wants to know if you're a lawyer, Liam. Because of you use the language, you use lawyerly language there, you know. Well, But it is quite interesting. It is too hot, Gary's. It's very hot. And a happy Canadian Day to all my fellow Canadian subscribers who follow me. Hi, I hope you're having a great day. Rocket Couch, thank you for holding it down over there on Twitch. I appreciate it, you know. Well, definitely. No, Liam, I hear you. It is, yeah. If you could hear, like I'm not 100% myself today, and this is like really overwhelming. So I hope that I am explaining it sufficiently, you know, to everyone that they can actually have a split on the charges here. We could have a mistrial on one charge and actually in a verdict on the others, and actually come to a conclusion on the other charges, and they would not be recharged. But if we do get a hung jury, you know, we could get a mistrial on racketeering. But it is up to the judge. He's got whether he will accept a split verdict, okay, and whether you know, whether they'll go through. Maybe the jury will come back tomorrow and they'll have a decision. Maybe there'll be some rethinking and discussion, and they will have the information that they need to make a better decision. Now, they were actually a big conversation between the prosecution and the defense in regards to the transcripts of the testimony that they had suggested and what should go back with them and all. But they asked for very specific events. You know, they were talking about the 2016 hotel event, and they were also talking about that time. I forget the year, but that Cassie was on the yacht and then accused of stealing drugs and then tossed off the yacht, like, and told to leave and everything. And then there was this whole big thing that she could come back, but she needed to do a freak off because he was upset. Yeah, that was his decision. You know, so mm, you do have things that you're wondering about, but they're not about the Diddy case. Well, you can always hit the back of the video about anything, Couch. You know, I mean, if it's related to stuff that I do, or if you're just wondering about life in general, like, I don't know if right now I'm in the mindset to help with that, but I'd be willing to try. You know, I don't know. I got a lot going on, you know. I served on 4 juries and have seen plus felt the confusion which can come from trying to link the facts with the charges. You know, that's why I was very pleased with the closing of the prosecution. I thought that Christy Slavik did a good idea with linking the actual testimonies to the charges into what they proved. But then again, it was very, very long, and I could also see a jury just getting exhausted listening for that length of time and losing the plot, so to speak. You know, it happens. You know, well, yeah, serving on juries definitely gives you a different perspective because you've been there. You know the pressures. You know what goes on in the deliberation room. I mean, each room is different, obviously, because each jury is different, 12 individual people or whatever the number is, and all with their own opinions and outlooks on stuff, all walks of life. Mm. I hear you there, Couch, wondering about the Karen Reed stuff. I'm still scratching my head on that one. Well, hey, it's done and dusted, and we go by what the verdict is. Not much to be done about it now. But I do find it curious, and I am trying to figure that out myself. But I don't think we're ever going to get the answers to those questions. I really don't, Couch. I feel you. You know, you too, Mip. I feel you guys, you know. Mm. Yeah. And I think we may have a situation similar here. But then again, that's our justice system here in America. It is up to the jury. Remember, they can look at the evidence any way they want. They can totally disregard it. You know, it's on how they present the case, you know. And they often say that, it is true that the closing statements and the opening statements are not evidence, but they do help a jury steer in one direction or the other based on who is the most persuasive in how they lay things out, the most believable. Or here's the key word, the most relatable. Because a prosecution can have a bang up case, throw everything in there, but if the jury doesn't relate to it in any way, doesn't understand it, doesn't have a good grasp of it, or basically doesn't even just like your personality or the way you did it, you could miss the mark. Juries are, well, individual. You can't pigeonhole them. You can do all, go and study all you want about jury perception and this, that, and the other thing. But you get 12 people together and they become a different thing, and we just can't predict the outcome. I'm curious to see where this is going to go tomorrow. I could be worried for nothing. Those could be all guilty. I guess I'm letting it out of the bag then that I think he actually did it. I kind of do think he did it. I have to be honest. I really don't see where he didn't. It's just a matter of whether it was with consent or without consent, whether consent was withdrawn on some of these things. When it comes to the RICO charge, there are two ways to look at it. You could just say that, well, as some may argue, that that's just how rich people function with their funds, personal and business all mixed up together, and calling something this instead of that, in the books. Maybe they think that anybody with power and money would be acting that way. I would like to think they don't, that they don't wave guns around and threaten people or blackmail people to do what they want, but it might be a popular misconception that that's just the way it is, and that we can't penalize him for just acting like a rich, spoiled little, millionaire. Because he gets away with it, we can't really blame him for it. Yes, we can. That's what the law is for, and that's what this case was all about. Is that you just can't act like that, dude. Doesn't matter how much money you have, how much power you have, how much authority you have over individual other people. Like, no, you can't do that. But we'll see. We'll see. Basically, if they were to pursue the Karen was frames to go further and more court stuff, who would be the ones to open that case? Would it be on the Reed team or something internal affairs would do? Here's the problem, Couch. It was already, the conspiracy part was already investigated by the federal government, opened up a case at the behest of Karen Reed and David Yaneni well over 2 years ago. And that has been closed with no other individual being charged for John O'Keefe's death. No conspiracy found. There were 2 other investigations into the investigation in Canton Police and the neighboring police area, where suggestions on how to improve what they did were made, and they were quite harsh in regards to they did not do their best in certain areas, but they showed no conspiracy or tampering of evidence in any way. So when you ask me this, I just need to tell you it's already been done. In any recourse they have now, perhaps the Reeds could open up a civil suit for some kind of go down the avenue of wrongful prosecution or whatever, if they would like, or open up their own internal investigation. But if you've already had 3 separate entities investigating the same thing, why post verdict would you do it again? The verdict doesn't change the facts of the case. The verdict is just the decision of the jury on how they looked at the facts of the case. Those 3 prior investigations looked at all the evidence and everything that was available. And there's nothing new to offer just because a jury didn't really look at that evidence the way they would. You know what I mean? I think I'm hoping I'm explaining that I kind of got that the way you can understand what I mean. I don't think there's an avenue of recourse to open up another investigation or inquiry into whether there was a conspiracy. I think that's done and dusted. I will tell you, I do believe the jury thought there was a conspiracy. I do believe that the mentality of the jury was all in that this was whole just not worth even trying her for. She wasn't guilty, and that they were trying to frame her in some way for it, in that they didn't look at the evidence in the same way that the prosecution did. I got talking to some people about it, and there's a lot of people jumping to the conclusion that because she wasn't found guilty, that automatically means there was a conspiracy. I don't agree, of course, but I'm curious who would have the burden to chase that theory down. Done and dusted, like I said. They can say that all they want because they believed it for so long, but there's nothing else you can do. The FBI, if there was a conspiracy, why didn't the FBI find it during their investigation while the conspiracy was going on? Huh? That's what I mean. And there were two separate police investigations open on the police investigation to prove if there was conspiracy or tampering of evidence to frame her. So, they're going to say, some people are just not going to let it go. I choose to honor whatever the jury decided. Unless they come up with something against the jury, there was some kind of jury misconduct or jury tampering, then I think it just stays the way it is. In the dust settles where the dust settles. This is it. Well, they didn't prove conspiracy just because they proved her not guilty of the charges. They didn't prove anything. It wasn't up to the defense to put up a case for it. They didn't have to. They just put the bug in everybody's ear. But they didn't prove anything in regards to a conspiracy. But still, like I said, it does appear that the jury did believe one existed, or that she was being overcharged. Seriously, all they got her for was just the drinking, and that's because she admitted it herself. One trial, we pretty much came to a consensus within 10 minutes, and we spent a while ensuring the verdict papers were filled out right. Then someone said, should we wait an hour so they don't think we're being flippant? So we just waited another 10 minutes before pressing the bell for the usher. Everyone has a right to say no. I think that's how he beats the case. Yes, you think? It. Welcome. I agree. It means the evidence wasn't strong enough, or their belief in the evidence. I think it's not the evidence itself that wasn't strong enough. I think it's the jury's belief in the evidence, in the way it was presented, in the way the defense was able to tear the actual witnesses apart in some way. Do you know what I mean, Rocket Couch? Like, I do believe the timeline stands by itself, but the way it was interpreted by the witnesses and the way the credibility of witnesses was dismantled took away from it. Because like the digital data doesn't lie, and it can't be manipulated. It can be presented in a way to be misinterpreted or not believed without security. You know what I mean? Without confidence. Well, for me, the timeline still is the same, and that was it for me. Well, the jury didn't have confidence in it based on the witnesses that provided it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So back to Diddy. Maggie, hello. She says, I am thinking he might get off, but you never know. I know. It could go either way tomorrow, in all honesty. Like I said, I'm thinking they're gonna find him not guilty on 2 through 5, but because they were so solid, so quick, and about it, and then they're struggling on 1. And I'm just thinking if 2 and 5 were guilty, they wouldn't be struggling on 1 so hard. That's all. And it's just like my quick view. Like, that's exactly how I felt the minute that I heard about it, and it hasn't changed. Like, it's just sticking with me. But we're gonna find out tomorrow. Like, we can only guess. We can only guess. Finding not guilty doesn't always mean you think the defendant is innocent. It can mean a juror doesn't think the evidence proves the charges. Exactly. Exactly. Looks like we're all on the same page about that. Exactly. It just means that they're not able to interpret it the way that is it gives them the most confidence. They don't have the confidence in the evidence. Exactly. All right, guys. I think I'm going to wrap this up. We will be back with updates on this. Check my community tab. I'll probably post throughout the day tomorrow, and I can't say whether I'll be live tomorrow night or not. I do know we do have a Brian Koberger hearing tomorrow, and if I can get the link, I definitely will be doing that live. You know, and if so, you have a place to talk about it. Brian Koberger is expected to present the prosecution's expected to present the plea deal, and he's expected to accept, and we have to see if Judge Hippler is going to allow it to go through. Um, and so we'll see. I'm just hoping there's no big surprises in that one. That was a big enough surprise. Like I don't need much more in that one tomorrow. You know. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Again, I apologize for pushing this back as many times that I did. It just was unavoidable. I mean, we did do Koberger last night. That was really quite the update and quite the shocking, surprising news about the plea deal. Very upsetting for some members of the victim's family, and I understand. And I would like to say this, regardless of what the victims' families are saying out there and how you feel about it, they are still the victim's family, and we need to offer grace. We don't know exactly what it's like to be in their shoes, and they are entitled to voice their opinion on how they feel about this stuff any way they choose, because part of our justice system is giving them their voice. And they can say what they want. Let them. I don't want to be a party to judging them for it, okay? Because we don't know how that is for them. We don't, we can't even, I can't even imagine how difficult it is for them right now. And not all of the victim families are going to agree in how they feel about the plea deal, but they're all entitled to their say. And it's really disheartening to see people attacking them on the socials. Like, let them be. They let them have their voice. They need to heal. They need to move forward. They need to have their say. And our justice system allows them to have that say. So, yeah, Shingen, that is part of the problem with this case. Them all participating in all the activities. And that's where like it gets fascinating about the legal definition of consent in that, because like at some point, at any point, someone can say no, and that means consent is withdrawn. And just because you did it yesterday doesn't mean it's okay today. And that's the legal definition of it right there. However we feel about it's wrong to, lead someone on or do this or change your mind in the middle of something. Legally, you can, okay? And legally, no means no, and that's it. And anytime you do anything after the word no, you're breaking the law. And that's just where the line is. Now, how we all feel about that ethically or morally, about situations between men and women or any type of sexual encounter or any type, um, where those boundaries are, where those lines are, and how we expect people to act like adults, well, that's all different. In our moral or ethical opinions about any of that doesn't matter. It's the law, the legal definition of consent that is going to matter here, and the jury's interpretation of it. So, it gets a little, you know, because, yeah, like freak offs are freak offs, but does that mean that, someone's sexual preference or how they, whatever it is that gets them off privately in their bedroom, doesn't mean you can violate laws to do it. It's just what it is. Yeah. Yeah, there seemed to be some evidence presented in emails and phone audio messages and text messages, Maggie, that said that they withdrew consent at several periods. But the problem is, just like in most complicated and somewhat abusive and coercive relationships, and there is documentation of some type of abuse here. And as the psychiatrist in the case stated, it is not uncommon for victims to keep going back to their abuser, because, love is love. They keep thinking, oh, he's sorry. Oh, it's going to change. Oh, it's my fault. Like, there's a whole mentality there. There's also all of the pressure of not having anywhere to go, for Cassie being blackmailed about the videos being released, not having a recording contract, financial pressures. Jane expressed the same. So it's a matter of the law at that point. Not really how we feel about their personal relationships or what they do privately. Well, I think I'm going to end it there. I am glad so many of you joined me. I appreciate the comments. I enjoyed the discussions back and forth very, very much. And if there's more to say, please, definitely, when I'm done, just hit the back of the video. I love having discussions with you guys, and I answer every comment. So although I have to leave now, I do hope that you'll consider continuing the conversation until we get a verdict. And use the back of the videos to do that. And in the meantime, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. If you do have a Kick account or a Twitch account, I would definitely appreciate the free follow. I'm trying to build up those platforms a little bit there, just so that I have a little bit of a net here. And it's not just YouTube. But thank you so much for joining me. And I appreciate all of you. I really do. And thanks so much for having the discussion with me tonight. And you'll see me again in the next couple of days. And keep watching that community tab, especially on this case with P. Diddy, because I think tomorrow we're going to hear more from the jury. I think it'll be quite interesting. All right. Have a great night, everybody.